G'day all, Adam Whiskey here from Whiskey Models again. This is part 2, as promised. So for this one, I think we're going to talk about layout framing. So yeah, let's talk framing. Okay, so first things first, we're building a frame for an insane layout. So as we've discussed in the other two, this shed is 100 foot by 40 foot. And the layout room is 80 foot by 40 foot, so a little bit on the big side. Basically what we're doing is we got a lot of timber to make a lot of layout. Now, I know that you'll go through the pages of Model Railroader, Railway Modeler, Continental Modeler, insert name of magazine here, and they'll give you 178,000 different ways that you can make framing. And all of them are right. Then again, for you, all of them may be wrong. It's up to you. So basically, I thought we'd go through a rundown of what we did and why we did it. Okie doke. So, what we did with our layout, which was basically something I learnt the hard way with our last layout and the previous one before that. So, the one before that, we actually built using 2" by 1" cypress pine. Now, I love that stuff because termites hate it, and in our last place in Jandowae, termites were a constant neighbour no matter what you did. So, it made sense. The only problem with cypress is it's great timber, but once it dries out as it ages, it shrinks. So it starts to split and everything else, which is a bit of a bugger. So the next layout that we did, we made out of just your standard 70 by 35 millimeter studding material. So studding material, why do you want to use it? 1, everywhere's got it. 2, it's cheap, relatively. And 3, everywhere's got it. Now, I know that seems like I'm mentioning the same thing twice, but it's kind of that important it's sort of worth it. So the method we've used is really simple. Effectively, all we do is we mark out our peninsulas, we run some longitudinal members on it, and we put cross members every 800 mil. So before we got into any of that, the first thing we did was we took the drawings we had from the engineers and everything else for this shed, and I brought them into CAD. Now, CAD's fine. If you don't know how to use it, no problems. Pencils and paper, they work just as well. If you can count, you can do it. So, what's stopping you? So I imported the drawings into AutoCAD. I basically drew a 3-dimensional version of this shed. With it, I included all the portals, because they're things that intrude on the room. Now, from there, the next step was to work out my minimum radius. Now, for our layout, we've gone with a 3-foot minimum radius, which is 915 millimeters. So that meant the benchwork for all curves had an inside radius of 900 mil and an outside of 1000. So for single track, that gave us 100 mil of wiggle room to play with if the track sort of wanted to do a bit of a kink or anything like that, just to break it up. So with the minimum radius set that we were happy to go with, the next step was effectively to mark a whole bunch of arcs, and then we just shuffled them around the room until it worked. Now, in amongst that, we had to allow for our aisleways. Now, this layout has branch lines around the walls, 3 of them, and the main line is all on peninsulas. Now, between those peninsulas, we wanted to leave a 1 metre, which actually turned out to be 1100 millimetre, aisleway, so there's plenty of room for people to comfortably walk past each other. And also, if you're standing here doing shunting and operations, someone can walk past you without ankle tapping you or wanting to knock you in the head. So with that all done, we had the basic plan for the layout, or the bench work, set out. Then the next step that we applied was to start overlaying that with photos and Google Maps and other things like that, and memory of what we actually wanted to model and represent. Now, my inspiration for this layout, if you're familiar with our channel, you'll see there's a video there about Normanby. Now, I filmed that when I was a 16-year-old kid. Now, I've always wanted to model it. The problem was as I got older and learnt about operations, I worked out that Normanby's about as boring as a pacifist pistol in a lot of ways, in that it's basically a hidden staging yard with trees. So from there, it worked into a situation where if you actually wanted a layout that you could operate, we needed a lot more. So it grew, and hence this. So the next step, what we did was we worked out heights and widths of all of our aisleways. So this entire layout is set with a 4-foot minimum height. So that means the bench work that everything is sitting on, which is made from the studding material, is all 1200 millimeters or 4 foot, give or take, above the ground. And from there, we're using yellow tongue for the sub-road bed, which I'm sure, before everyone gets in and tells me how I'm wrong, it's something different and we're giving it a go because weight, durability, moisture, as we discussed in the last video, and a million other things that come into it when you're laying bench work that we just don't want to move. So what we did from there, and this is going back to using the studding material. Now, studding material comes in 4.8, 5.4 and 6 meter lengths. Now, from there, the prices vary wildly depending on where you buy it from, how much of it you're buying, and what you want to do with it. Now, first things first, when you try and deal with some timber merchant or a hardware store for buying studding material, they're automatically going to tell you about treated as timber that is structural. We don't need structural material. The amount of it that we're using and the way that we're bracing it, it negates any need for it to be structural. Now, the only downside to being non-structural is that there's a lot more knots and things like that in it. The beauty of using non-structural timber, as I mentioned, first and foremost, is price. So structural timber in a 4.8 meter length varies wildly depending where you are in what country and whereabouts. Now, in Australia at the moment, a 4.8 metre length of structural timber for studding is ranging from between $22 and $28. One place even had the hide to quote me $32 as their special price. Obviously, we said no. In the end, by going with the non-structural timber in 4.8 metre lengths, we actually ended up with the prices standard were between $12 to $15 depending where you got it. The last place we bought it from, we bought an entire pack, which is just under a ton, and it's 140 sticks. That cost us $1,412, and then another 80 or 90 bucks for delivery. We thought that was a bit of a bargain. Now, thus far, the framework around me is up to about 60% done. We've gone through just under 2 packs of timber, so a little bit. Just the framing thus far for the layout that Insanity built is a whisker under 2 ton. We've also thus far gone through 3,000 50mm chipboard screws. Now, I will actually put a link in the description of the video for the place where I'm buying my screws if you're in Australia. This is not an endorsement or anything like that. It's a company that I found by accident and their prices are insane. So a normal box of 550mm chipboard screws from Bunnings and your standard hardware stores is floating around the $48 to $50 mark. I just bought 3,000 off them for 90 bucks with free delivery. So I'm pretty happy with that. And I cannot recommend these guys enough. We're out in the middle of nowhere and this stuff turned up here in 48 hours, which is not bad going. Okay, one of the things you'll find with using the non-structural timber or general purpose or whatever they're calling it these days with the people you're dealing with is that you're going to get some twisting and warping in the timber. Now, a lot of people say, oh, that's why you can't use it. Wrong. It's really simple. Get one of these little doofries here. They're cheap and cheerful, just simple, quick release clamps. Put it on the board, clamp it up, and then look, push, pull, whatever you want to do. You can actually do that when you've got a longer length. You put this down the other end, and if you get someone helpful to stand on it or to put a bit of muscle into it and twist it, you can actually get it straight whilst you're screwing the cross members in. Sometimes you want to work from the ends towards the middle. Other times, if there's twists, bows, and bends in it, work from one end and just work your way through. So, really, really simple thing. The other option, if you don't have any of these, is grab one of these little sheet lifters, which are designed for carrying plasterboard and everything else around. They fit perfectly. So, same principle, you can push it and you can use that to twist the timber around to get it where you need it. And then the benefit of that is once it's all screwed together, it's all under tension. So the next step with it was all backdrops. Now, it's really easy if you allow for this right from the start. So we've got our depth of peninsula and this side here and this side here. the depth of these is based purely on what we're planning on putting in the area. Now, it's divided by another piece of studding. We've got plenty of it. Basically, it goes to 1910 millimetres. And the reason we've got 1910 is because we've allowed an extra 70 millimetres so that we can put another cross member, again, studding, to run across here, to come out parallel with the front of the layout, and then we'll put the headboard, which will have all of our lighting. So the whole idea of the way we've constructed this is effectively it's a series of rectangles. You work out in 4.8 metre lengths, and we work out the width we need for both sides of that peninsula, minus a 70mm post for the backdrop. All of our backdrops are being made out of 3mm MDF. It's cheap, it's cheerful, we rip it down to the size we want, and then it's in 8-foot lengths. And guess what? A sheet of 3mm MDF at the moment is about 20 to 22 bucks. Now, that's not too bad, but it's pretty bad for a dopey long-haired bugger like me, because the last time I bought it I paid $7.50 a sheet. Unfortunately, we need just under 300 sheets for this layout. So once we do that, we have our legs pre-cut. I even have some little offcuts that I've set to 300mm, or a whisker under a foot, because this layout is, as I said, it's a rectangle with some sticks holding it off the ground, but underneath it, at 300mm above the ground, we've got a shelf. Having whiskey models, plus the amount of stuff that we all have as modelers, we need a lot of shelving. Thankfully, with this layout, we'll have just under 400 metres of it. So once we had the start of those in, we needed to allow for things like curves. So turnarounds at the ends of peninsulas and things of that nature. And again, it's actually quite simple. Basically, as I said, our minimum radius is 3 foot, 915 millimetres. But where we can go broader, we will. So our turnarounds, we allowed 1200 radius, 4 foot. Now that means that the end of each peninsula needs to be 8 foot wide. All we've done for that is cut 2 horizontal members at 8 foot and 2 legs at 4 foot, screw them together as a box, stand it up, and have 2 pieces coming out 1200 or 4 foot at 90 degrees from the center, and then a leg on it. That effectively gives you a basic turnaround. The next step is to cut 4 pieces at 1200 millimeters, 4 foot, with a 45-degree bevel on the end. And then we screw it in, we screw in the leg, there's your turnaround. Now, it looks like it'll do the job, and once you put your sub-road bed on there, that will firm it all up. But in the meantime, it's going to sort of be really easy to knock around and everything else. So what we did was we then cut 8 cross members. The length is completely irrelevant, with one end cut to a 45-degree angle, and we just push them in until they're tight. 2 50mm screws on one end, 2 50mm screws on the other, and walk away. That is now stable. So basically, with that method being used, as I said, it may not be the right way to do it for everyone, but it works for us, and this layout is strong. We keep walking on it to do stuff in the ceiling. Not a creak, not an ounce of movement. Now, doing all of this, thus far, all in for a layout of this stupid size, we're up for about $3,500 to $4,000 worth of timber, and we've basically gone through, I think, about $1,500 worth of yellow tongue thus far. So for $5,500 to have a layout of this size, personally, I think that's a bargain. And let's be honest, it's going to keep me entertained for a bloody long time. So yeah, next chapter we'll do sub-road bed. We shall see how we go with that, but stick around and see what happens. So that's done. Where's my bloody coffee cup? It's down here. Who'd be stupid enough to make something like this? This is ridiculous.